President Buhari presides over 11th Federal Executive Council meeting. President of the African Development Bank receives assurance of Nigeria over his re-election. Plus, Senate approves $5.5 billion loan request from the executive. These and more on Panorama today, coming to you live from Abuja. I'm Elizabeth Omori. We'll be right back. The 11th meeting of the Federal Executive Council in the year 2020 is underway at the Presidential Villa in Abuja. President Muhammad Buhari is presiding over the meeting, which is the third to be held virtually. State House correspondent Adamu reports that the President was joined at the Executive Council chambers by Vice President Yemi Osinbajo, Secretary to the Government of the Federation, Boss Mustapha, the Chief of Staff Ibrahim Gambari, and few ministers. Other members of the highest policy decision-making body are participating in the meeting from the operational bases across the nation's capital. This is in compliance with the social distancing guidelines and protocols aimed at minimizing the spread of COVID-19. Apart from considering members for possible approval, some ministers are also expected to give account of their stewardship to the council in furtherance of the next level agenda of the Buhari administration. More on this will come in our subsequent bulletin. President Muhammad Buhari is reassuring the President of the African Development Bank, Dr. Akinwumi Adesina, that Nigeria will stand solidly behind him in his re-election bid for a second term of office. The President gave the reassurance by granted audience to Dr. Adewumi on a courtesy visit. State House correspondent Adamu reports.
You are welcome. Thank you very much.
The president of the African Development Bank, Dr. Akinwumi Adesina, has been at the center of allegations of impropriety at the financial institution, but was cleared of any wrongdoing by its Committee on Ethics after investigations. However, the United States Department of Treasury dismissed the verdict, calling for an independent investigation. President Muhammadu Buhari, who recommended Dr. Adesina to African leaders in 2015 for the position and worked assiduously for his election, said having lived up to expectations as the nation's ambassador, he will continue to stand by him. He pledged that Nigeria would work with all other African leaders and stakeholders in the African Development Bank towards ensuring that Dr. Adesina's mandate is renewed for a second term of 5 years, given the record of his achievements so far. The African Union had already endorsed the incumbent AFDB president as sole candidate for the continent. The African Development Bank is a multilateral institution owned by African countries, but the United States is a major investor. Giving a background to what is happening in the bank, Dr. Adesina explained that all the 16 allegations raised against him were trumped up and without facts, evidence, and documents as required by the rules and regulations of the financial institution. He said calls for fresh investigations by the United States after the Ethics Committee of the bank cleared him of all the allegations and upheld by the governors of the bank were against the rules. Dr. Adesina said having been exonerated, any other investigation would amount to bending the rules of the bank to arrive at a predetermined conclusion. The motive, he said, is to soil his name and that of the bank. The FDB president described as a thing of pride being a Nigerian and thanked President Muhammadu Buhari for robustly supporting him all along. He used the opportunity to commiserate with the president on the death of the former Chief of Staff Abubakari, describing Professor Ibrahim Gambari, the new Chief of Staff, as a man of integrity and of global standing. From the State House, Adamu Sambu, NTA News.
Now, borrowing is one of the components of national budgeting, especially in the face of huge fiscal deficit. The impact of the loans are maximized when they are strictly spent on projects earmarked for it. This was the conviction of the Senate as it approved the external loan of $5.5 billion request by the executive. National Assembly correspondent Ignatius Nkwo tells us more.
1 of the 3rd schedule to the Constitution.
5 days after the transmission of the request for the approval of external loan of $5.5 billion to the Senate by President Muhammadu Buhari, the request has been approved.
That the terms and conditions of the loans from each lender as are contained in the duly executed loan agreement be forwarded to the National Assembly for proper documentation.
There will be deficit in the 2020 budget, and there will be necessity to take borrowing to be able to bridge the gap.
The Senate also approved the revised 2020 to 2022 medium-term expenditure framework and fiscal strategy paper. The report of its Committee on Finance reviewed the benchmark for price of crude oil per barrel from $25 submitted by the executive to $28. Crude oil production per day was reduced from 1.9 million to 1.8 million barrels per day, while the exchange rate of 360 naira to $1 was sustained as submitted by the executive.
360 to $1 as proposed by the MTEF amendment be sustained with continuous effort by the Central Bank of Nigeria to stabilize the exchange rate.
360 to $1 certainly is a devaluation of our naira.
Passing the PIB bill will also be able to give us more money.
Keeping money in the natural resource development account, I think, is a waste and is really not helping. It means we are not doing much with what we get in that account.
Senate has confirmed that 7 nominees as chairman and members of the Federal Character Commission, with Dr. Mohiba Farida Dankaka as chairman, while James Jia Kolo is to replace late Daniel James Kolo from Kwara State. It also confirmed the appointment of Dr. Frederick Ekwem and Dr. Jonah Madugu as commissioners for the Federal Civil Service Commission. Senate condemned the killing of Tina Ezekwe in Lagos by stray bullet and Owa Omozuwa, a first-year university student who was also raped and brutalized by unknown persons inside a church in Benin City, Edo State. Senators called for the immediate arrest of the culprits and provision of stiffer penalties for offenders.
A 3-year-old baby was raped by a 44-year-old man.
Apart from stiffer penalties, I think we really need to come up with a stronger advocacy against rape.
And I believe that we need to make the penalties for rape stiffer.
Senate has adjourned plenary to Tuesday, 9th of June 2020 from the National Assembly. Ignatius Unko, NTA News.
Let's now shift our attention to the broadcast industry. Information and Culture Minister Lawan Ahmad has inaugurated a 7-man task team on audience analysis that will help position the broadcast industry on a sound revenue-generating platform. Anthony Forson reports.
Inaugurating the task team, which has Bello Kankarofi as chairman and Joseph Muta as secretary, Lawan Ahmad said their inauguration heralds a new dawn in the broadcast industry. With the digital switch over from analog television underway, awaiting an accelerated agenda to make it a veritable tool to uplift the creative industry out of the crippling effect of COVID-19, audience measurement, which has remained the missing link in the entire ecosystem, is desirable in making the digital switch over sustainable for digital distributors, channel owners, TV content producers, and advertisers.
Without audience measurement, we will not see the growth in our television and the value creation in the creative industry that the economy and people of Nigeria so much desire. We need an objective and scientific audience measurement system that articulates the value of the content to consumers as well as the value of the audience to advertisers.
The minister noted that the absence of world-class measurement regime has resulted in underinvestment in the sector, which is necessary to foster growth due to advertisers' reliance on audience measurement to assist in advert placements.
The existing model will never enable Nigeria's creative industry to reach its full potential. It stunts the quality of the content that can be created and also limits the capacity of television platforms to invest in dynamic contents that consumers will be attracted to.
The minister decried the lack of proportional value of broadcast adverts despite Nigeria's population when compared to South Africa. He said in 2016, Nigeria's advert revenue stood at $309 million compared to South Africa, which was $1,301 million. Lai Mohammed maintained that there is an urgent need to have a robust return on investment and an overall effect of guaranteed greater spending by advertisers. Similarly, the federal government, he said, is subsidizing signal distribution because channels cannot pay for carriage by their signal distributors who have invested in equipment and transmission. The committee's terms of reference include identifying best practice audience measurement system, recommend a framework for supporting the sustainability of the system, recommend a payment and disbursement framework among key stakeholders in the industry, that is, BORN, Media Independent Practitioners Association of Nigeria, and ADVAN. Chairman of the task team, Bello Kankarofi, expressed gratitude for the honor, assuring that even though the task is Herculean, members of the team will strive to justify the confidence reposed in them. In Abuja, Anthony Forson, NTA News.
To security now, the federal government has directed the police to unravel the circumstances surrounding the gang rape and murder of Vera Omozoa, a female student of the University of Benin, and the serious sexual abuse of a minor in Jigawa State by 14 men, and bringing the perpetrators to justice. In a statement issued by the Minister of Information and Culture, Lai Mohammed, by bringing the perpetrators of the heinous crimes to justice, the federal government will be serving a strong notice to its total evasion of gender-based violence in whatever form. The minister described the gang rape and murder of Miss Omozoa as a cruel and barbaric act that offends human sensibility, in addition to being antithetical to decency, saying no society will tolerate such act. He also says the serious sexual abuse of a minor by 14 men in Jigawa State is not only repulsive but highly condemnable. He points out that the true measure of a society can be found in how it treats its most vulnerable members. The federal government, Lai Mohammed says, will do everything possible to stem the growing tide of gender-based violence in the country. Still on security, the Inspector General of Police, Mohammed Adamo, has ordered the immediate transfer of the ongoing investigations into the sexual assault and murder of Miss Vera Omozoa in Benin, Edo State, from the State Police Headquarters in Benin to the Force Headquarters, Abuja. In a release by the Force Public Relations Officer, the DIG in charge of the Force Criminal Investigation Department, DIG Anthony Ogbizi Michael, will henceforth provide direct supervision and ensure speedy and thorough investigation of the case. Similarly, the IGP has ordered immediate deployment of specialized investigators and additional investigation assets to all the gender desk offices in the juvenile welfare centers across the country. This is to strengthen and enhance the capacity of the units to respond to increasing challenges of sexual assaults and domestic gender-based violence linked with the outbreak of the COVID-19 pandemic and other social ills within the country. You're watching Panorama from Abuja. Let's take a short break. More reports ahead when we return. Thanks for staying with us. 241 new cases of COVID-19 were announced by the Nigeria Center for Disease Control as at 11:47 p.m. June 2nd, 2020. These new reported cases bring the number of confirmed cases to 10,819 in the country. Of the 241 new cases, Lagos, as usual, recorded more with 142. Oyo has 15, the FCT has 13, Kano 12, Edo 11, Delta 10, while Kaduna and Rivers states have 9 new cases each. There are 8 new cases in Borno, 4 in Jigawa and 3 each in Gombe and Plateau states, while Osun and Bauchi have 1 case each. Lagos remains on top of the Nigerian COVID-19 chart table with 5,377 cases, trailed by Kano with 970 cases and the FCT with 687 confirmed cases. A total of 3,239 COVID-19 patients have recovered and discharged, with 314 deaths on record so far. Still in COVID-19, as part of guidelines to regulate the reopening of places of worship in the country amidst the coronavirus pandemic, the Presidential Task Force on COVID-19 says worshippers must observe personal hygiene protocols and physical distancing, which must be enforced by religious leaders and respective state governments. Metarikme tells us more.
Use of face masks is mandatory. We strongly discourage all close contacts, including shaking hands, hugging, kissing, handing out of materials, and sharing of worship implements, including prayer mats, musical organs, microphones, etc. The capacity of the facility should be limited to allow for physical distancing of at least 2 meters between persons. Places of worship should plan, if possible, for separate entry and exit points. Churches to open from 5 a.m. and close by 8 p.m. For churches, each service should be for a maximum of an hour with an interval of 30 minutes in between services to allow time for disinfection. Mosques may open 15 minutes before Adhan and close 10 minutes after prayer for Fajr, Zuhur and Asr. For Friday prayers, mosques are to open 20 minutes before prayers and close 20 minutes after prayers. The total time for Friday prayers, including sermons, should not exceed an hour.
The PTF says these guidelines for the reopening of places of worship are basic regulations for state governments to enforce and not relax.
They are the ones that will be doing the enforcement, and we expect them to limit capacity.
It is important to bear in mind that this phase, more than lockdown itself, is in the hands of the people more than in the hands of government.
The chairman of the task force said a photograph trending on social media of children wearing used personal protective garments calls for proper disposal of PPEs.
Although it is not certain if the photograph was taken in Nigeria, but significantly, that photograph represents a dangerous development. It underscores the need for more risk communication, community engagement, and diligence in the disposal of used PPEs on the part of our frontline workers and the administrators.
Nigerians are urged to empathize with those affected by the coronavirus pandemic and refrain from criticizing the growing figures.
We've had 812 healthcare workers infected. They're not just numbers. 29 of these work for the Nigerian Center for Disease Control. There are people I know. They have families, wives, children. About 8 of them right now are in the Do Treatment Center. So how does this represent fraud? So we need to really understand what these numbers mean.
The Minister of Foreign Affairs appeals to Nigerians abroad awaiting evacuation to be patient.
With this new mechanism that will no longer require hotel quarantining, is that hopefully we'll also be able to now speed up the process of repatriation.
The task force gave indication that resumption of domestic flights by 21st of this month may compel a review of the interstate travel ban. In Abuja, Mitaire Ikwen, NTA News.
In compliance with the federal government's easing of the lockdown imposed to curb the spread of COVID-19, Kano State government has released guidelines and established protocols on how to manage access to markets and locations of economic activities to limit the risk of transmission. The State Commissioner for Information, Malam Muhammad Garba, says in a statement that after due consultations with key public health professionals and critical review of the situation in Kano, markets, places of worship and movement of persons are now allowed on Sundays, Wednesdays and Fridays from 6 a.m. to 6 p.m., emphasizing compliance with safety rules. The Commissioner pointed out that while these restrictions have been lifted, interstate movements except for goods, agricultural produce and essential services are still in force. Schools, he says, will remain closed. Like most sectors of the economy, COVID-19 has impacted the aviation industry as revenue news nosedived in the sector since the lockdown. Aviation correspondent Emmanuel Ayimere examines the overall effect of the pandemic on domestic flights and what lies beyond.
Nigeria joined the rest of the world to shut down her airports in March 2020 as part of efforts to contain the spread of coronavirus, a pandemic which has taken a toll on lives, travels and tours, leading to financial crisis in the sector. For instance, the Federal Airport Authority of Nigeria, FAN, says that chains of activities like the Bureau de Change, car hire, duty-free and other businesses that thrive on passengers' activities around the airport have ceased.
Aircraft are on ground, airport operators are on ground, handlers are on ground, fuelers are on ground. Almost every stakeholder in the aviation industry has been grounded. Our revenue has dropped by 95%. And when you consider that we shoulder a lot of our own responsibilities, especially salaries and pensions, and then we have a huge amount of overhead costs, then technically it's like we are saying this is threatening our very existence.
Already, pay cuts and staff retrenchment had commenced since April by some airlines as the effect of COVID-19 bites on, with some going as high as 80% in staff salary reduction across board, while others stated that 90% of staff should proceed on leave without pay from May 1st, 2020 until further notice.
As planes sit on the ground, they run beers. The only time they rake in money is when they are in the skies. For instance, if this maintenance work that I have said to you that must be done some fortnightly, if they were judiciously and diligently done, then the workforce that were busy doing them would have been paid, wouldn't they?
June 24th is the expected resumption date of local flights in Nigeria, but coping with the COVID-19 protocols for airlines is another hurdle ahead. Emmanuel Ayimere, NTA News.
And from aviation, we now move to sports. Bauchi State set to resuscitate its sports sector. Details